Hey everyone, so for this video, I'm going to be doing a lighting breakdown of a scene that I did a while back. It's going to be mostly Blender and a bit of Photoshop, but at the same time, I want to go over some of the conceptual stuff that I think is really important, and that goes before even touching any of the software. So I really hope that you like this video, and I hope that it can help you out. So when starting a piece, I really think it's important to come up with some reference images before even touching any of the software. Whether that's photographs or other pieces of art, I really actually recommend having a combination of both. I really like really nice photography. Pinterest is really good for that, so I would highly recommend that you sign up for Pinterest, and it's a really great way to search for really nice photography, and you can organize it as well within your account. And what I really like about photography is it's got like a really nice sense of lighting, composition, and all that kind of stuff, right? So there's a lot of inspiration to draw from. And I really like a combination of photographs, but also pieces of art, whether it's like from ArtStation or whatever. I think it's a really good idea to come up with both of those things. But I really recommend also to not be so heavy with using only other artwork. I think that like an 80-20 sort of ratio where using mostly photographs and then some 20% of the reference would be actual artwork from other artists. I think that's sort of like a good balance, because that way you'll come up with I think more original ideas in that sense. So what you see here are some nice photographs that I picked out, and they really come from a couple like three keywords that I wanted to really use to drive the inspiration and to drive the look of the piece, right? And those three words are obscurity, emergence, and atmosphere. And from those words, I picked out these photos, right? And so, let's go over these one by one. So for this one, I really wanted like a sense of mystery. So as you can see, these buildings are sort of poking out, and they're obscured by the clouds beneath them, but they're like starting to emerge out of it, right? And then a lot of the really cool part of it too is that some of the details of the buildings are hidden in the shadows. You can't even see them, right? Some portions of it. And I really like the sense of like mystery and atmosphere that it provides. And then in this next image here, we have this guy here wearing a suit, and he's walking into the shadows, right? And what's really cool about this is, again, like a little bit of a sense of mystery, but also I really like how his suit blends into the shadow. And yeah, it's a really cool thing that a lot of his details are hidden by the environment. And in this middle piece here, kind of similar things going on. We have a lot of atmosphere with the smoke and the dust. We have this character here that, you can't really make him out, but he's got like a silhouette that's pretty much all dark. And the same thing with the structures here, where you get like a lot of it in the shadows. You can't really tell what's going on, but you see the broad shapes of it. This piece here I really like. It's sort of the opposite of this one, where this guy here is walking out of the shadow, and again, a lot of his clothing is like hidden by the shadow that he's walking out from, and then he's moving forward. He's progressing into the light, right? And I like that idea of him emerging from the shadow into the light. And I really like the sense of progression that he's got here. So that's something that I really wanted to bring into this piece. And into this last piece here, it's more of like a definitely more mechanical, more design, which is something that I wanted to do in the first place, because I ended up doing a spaceship sci-fi piece for this one. And so like the mechanical aspects of this is really cool. But what I really like about this again is that a lot of the design is hidden by the shadows, right? Like if you take a look at the undercarriage here, you can't even see any of the details. And from a more technical standpoint, I really like that idea of it, and like really using the lighting to hide the design, right? And from the get-go, I really wanted this piece to not be more of a design piece. It was really more about the mood and the tone and the atmosphere of it. And I didn't really want to use my time to like figure out every nook and cranny and every little panel that the ship has. So, not to say that there's anything wrong with that. Like if I wanted to do a design piece, I would definitely do a different kind of a lighting setup. But for this piece, again, I really wanted it to be more atmospheric and really, really moody. And so using the lighting to kind of really hide a lot of the aspects of the surfacing not only helped me with saving time in terms of the design, but it also provided that sort of mystery that I wanted to kind of convey. Okay, so now that we're armed with these images for inspiration and also these keywords, obscurity, emergence, atmosphere, and knowing that the mood takes priority over design, we can go ahead and start touching the software. And honestly, this tutorial is going to be pretty basic when it comes to the technical aspects of things. I'm honestly quite still very new with Blender. It's something that I've only been using for maybe like half a year now, so I'm not like a super expert at it. But knowing the direction that I want to go and the mood that I want to hit with this piece, I can come in confident knowing that I can really use as long as I have the basic knowledge of the software, that I can go ahead and make something quite visually appealing. And all of this stuff here that you see, the images and the keywords, really is what drives the lighting direction for the scene that I want to create. So again, it's really important to kind of know this stuff and know the goals that you're trying to get to before even touching the software, because the software is really, really complicated. There's a lot of things that you can do in Blender. Blender is an amazing tool from what I can tell. Same with anything like 3D Code or Maya or Unreal Engine or any of those engines. There's just so much that you can do with those things, and without like a very cohesive and very well put together plan before you even touch the software, you can really spin in circles and you can spend a lot of time just kind of touching a lot of things that don't really get you anywhere. And so before touching any of that stuff, I think it's a really good idea to put together some images and get to know exactly what you want to get out of the time that you're going to be putting in. So now that we have somewhat of a plan put together, we can start working in Blender with a certain degree of confidence. And so this scene here is, and I just want to mention that that this is part of a 3D to 2D process. The intention all along was to create a base in 3D, in this case Blender, and then kick it up a notch, do a paint over, and some image adjustments in a 2D software, in this case Photoshop. But the 3D base that you see here provides about 60 to 70% of the process, so it does do a lot of the heavy lifting. So the lighting done in Blender that you see here is definitely carrying a lot of the weight, and definitely what you see here is not 100% to what we were going to see in the finished product, but it's very, very close. So as you probably noticed, the frame rate is a bit choppy. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hide the clouds, the cloud volumes. And of course, I'm going to be hiding the lights because I want to show you exactly how I set up the lighting from scratch. So before getting into adding actual lights into the scene, I just wanted to go over the render properties. So if we want to go into this little microwave icon here, or whatever it is, we want to make sure that the render engine is set to Eevee. There's also Workbench, which I have no idea what it is. And there's also Cycles, which is the non-real-time render engine, which provides a lot more realistic and higher quality lighting to your renders. But in this case, we're just going to stick to Eevee, which is the real-time render engine. And you can definitely go into a lot more detail here. There's a lot of different settings that you can get into and all the nitty-gritty that you can definitely dive into. But in this case, I decided that Eevee was the best choice. And there's only a few settings here that is really important for lighting, one of which is bloom. And I'm going to be turning the clouds back on just for the moment, just so we can see the differences here. And bloom is something that you can actually add later in the process when you have the lighting already set up. It's more of like a cherry on top to your render. And what it really does is, if you notice the point light here that we have, if I turn it on and off, you can see that there's a glow that the bloom provides. And what bloom does essentially is all of the bright spots of the scene, it really just kind of gives it that certain glow that gives it sort of that more cinematic, more hazy kind of feel. And so it's a really nice addition to the render. Another thing that I have turned on here is the volumetric lighting. And there's a bunch of different settings here, but what's important for lighting here is that we have volumetric lighting set up. We're going to go into further detail as to why this is important. But if I turn it off, you see that a lot of the fog effects and the lighting that the fog provides disappears, and we want to use sort of the environment to help us light the scene and give it that atmospheric look. And so this is an important setting to have on. Another thing that we want to have on is the volumetric shadows. So I'm using these volumes here, and you can see that there are shadows cast in the dark spots here, and that really provides a really cool effect. And that's because we have the volumetric shadows turned on. And just so you can see, if I have it turned off, it becomes really flat. So volumetric shadows is definitely something that we want on. So let's go ahead and hide the lights once more, as well as the clouds, so that we have a fresh new scene to add new lights to. And I just want to say that the lighting setup in terms of adding new lights and the placements and the number of lights that's being used in the scene is actually quite minimal. It's very simple and nothing too complicated. I would say that the most complicated part of this setup is setting up the different render settings, and a lot of these sliders that you see here, all these different options, you're just gonna have to kind of play around with it and get the result that you want. There's also a volumetric setup, volumetric fog setup that we're going to go over after we set up our lights. That's a little bit more technical, I would say, but overall, the lighting setup here is really simple. So the first light we want to add is a directional light, or a sun. And if we just go to the top here and go to the add drop down, go to light, and then select sun, we'll get this directional light here. And as you can see, if I move it around the scene, it doesn't do anything, it doesn't change the way it lights. What really matters for the sun or the directional light is the rotation, the angle in which you're pointing it to. And so keeping in mind, again, going back to the earlier images that we went over, that we want a sense of obscurity and some mystery, and we want to use the shadows to kind of hide a lot of the assets that we have. And on a technical level, we definitely don't want to see all of the panels, and we kind of want to use the lighting to our advantage in terms of hiding a lot of the surfaces, right? In terms of mood, and just saving us time from rendering all the little bits and bobs of the surface of the ships. So we want to keep that in mind. And so, doing something like this, where we get enough of a light on the top surfaces, but really hiding the sides there that's visible to the camera. So I'd say something like this. And again, we're gonna go back and forth and tweak this as we add more lights and kind of tweak the scene a little bit more, but this is looking pretty decent for now. So another thing that we want to do is we'll switch from our render properties here to the data, which is this light bulb icon here. And we're just gonna tweak a few settings here. Right now the strength is to 1. We'll just turn that up a tad, just so we get a bit of a stronger light. And we'll also change the color a little bit to a little bit of a warmer tone, because I know that what I want from this image is for the volumetric clouds or the environment to be a little bit more cool. So I want the light to be a little bit more warm so that we have a nice color contrast. And even if it's like really subtle, it really makes a difference. So we're not going to go like pure blown saturated here. Just a little bit will be enough. And we got to make sure that the shadow is ticked on here. But for now, again, we're going to go back to this later to kind of fine tune some settings. But for now, this is good and we can move on to adding more lights. So the next light that we're going to be adding is a couple point lights. So I want to add a little bit of life to these ships. Right now, they're kind of pretty dead. They don't have any semblance of, you know, something working within them. So I want to kind of add and suggest to the viewer that, hey, these ships are alive and there's things going on inside it. And one way to do that is to add some lights to the interior. So what I want to do is I'm going to use this cursor here. And one tip is, one thing I really like a lot is using the cursor to spawn objects with. So if I just hold shift and right click, it will place the cursor to where I want and it will snap it to the mesh. And so what I'm going to do again is go to add light and then add a point light. So now you can see that it's inside this hole here. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to tweak the power a little bit and also increase the radius so that it affects more of the geometry that it hits. And then also tweak the color so that, again, it's kind of this warm, very hot kind of hue. And I just want to turn this off just so I can see how it's affecting things. So now we want to do the same thing to the other ship in the distance here. So what I'm going to do is Shift D while the point light is selected. That will duplicate it. And then again, I'm going to use the cursor to place the object. So I'm going to hold Shift and right click on the opening of the far ship there. And then with the duplicated point light selected, I'm going to go to Object, Snap, and go Selection to Cursor. And that will make sure that it's placed exactly where the 3D cursor is. And now we have it there. And so again, all of these different settings, I'm not sweating about too much right now. I just kind of want to get like a broad pass in. And then later on, when all of the lights and, you know, as I'm adding more lights into the scene, then we can kind of go back and forth and iterate. Because right now I don't want to tweak something to perfection because I don't know what it's going to look like in context with the other things. So I think that's one of the important things in principle to keep in mind is when you're adding lights, you don't want to spend too much time fussing over the little details to begin with. It's like get to a certain point, get it to a point where you think it feels right, and then move on. And then later on, you can always go back and iterate and tweak things. So now we're going to add a few more point lights to the engine side of things, right? So I'm going to use the cursor once more, and I'm going to click on the rear side of the first ship here. And again, I'm just going to go back to add light point. And then we're going to adjust the radius here because I really want a large influence area. Increase the power a little bit. And then for this particular one, we're using warm lights so far. We've used a warm light for the sun and the point lights. So for this one, I kind of want to add some contrast and kind of have it a little more towards the cooler color. So something like that. Okay. And then next, again, we're going to do the same thing here. We're going to duplicate the light. Snap the 3D cursor to the other rear side of the other ship. And then we're going to go to object again. Go to snap. And then selection to cursor. So right now, again, it doesn't look perfect. But as we add more lights and add more elements to the scene, we'll tweak and adjust as we see fit. So now we have a sunlight and a handful of point lights added to our scene. And that's really all of the lights we're actually going to need. So the next step that we're going to take is we're going to be adding a volumetric fog to the scene. And it will add a very nice hazy atmospheric effect to our environment. And what it really does is it takes the lighting that comes out of the lights that we just added, and it will disperse it and scatter it throughout, and it will really create a very cool look that it's going to add a lot of depth and atmosphere to the environment. So in order to do that, the first thing we need to do is add a cube to our scene. So we're just going to go back to our add drop down, mesh, and a cube. Let's just try to move it to the center a little bit. And what we got to do is go to the scale gizmo and just scale it up until everything is pretty much covered. And if I zoom out, it's really big. Let's say something like that to start. And again, we can always tweak this later. And now that we have the box, let's just rename it volume cube or something like that. And then now we're currently at the layout tab here. We're just going to go to the shading. And we want to make sure that when we go to this drop down that we have object selected. And currently there's no material assigned to this. So what we're going to do is right here, we're just going to click new. And now we have this principled BSDF, like default material. And then we have this material output node. And what we want to do is just take the principled BSDF node and just delete that. And I'm just going to switch to this view here so that we can see the rendering as well. And then we're going to go to add, and let's just find it here. Down in the shader options, at the very bottom here, we have volume scatter. And we're just going to connect this green dot to the volume input here. And now we're just going to turn down the density ever so slightly. We don't need that much. So let's try something like 0.010, something like that. And then let's just tune this anisotrope to about 0.9. Let's try 0.8. And now that we have this material set up, we can just go to the section here and go to the material. And let's actually rename this. Let's call it matte underscore volume fog, something like that. And then now if we go down to volume, we have all these settings that we can control without having to go into this tab here. So we can just go back to our layout. And now we can tweak this as we see fit. And so the volume fog is affected by the angle of the sun. So what we're going to do is play with the angle of the sun a little bit and see how it affects the fog. Let's also turn up the strength. And now we see a much hazier, a lot more atmospheric effect, right? So let's tweak it ever so slightly until we get to a angle that we like. So I really wanted the section on the top left to kind of be where the light is. Compositionally, I thought it was the most appealing. So I want to make this section of the viewport as bright as possible. Something like that. And now what I want to do is, I've initially made the color warm, but now I've kind of decided that the warm color is overpowering at this point because the ships are also they're orange, right? So they're on the warm side of the color spectrum. So I kind of want to balance that out a little bit and bring this to a more cool color and get that nice color contrast and really make the ship stand out a little bit more, you know? A little more in the green, blue, and that's looking quite tasty there. Alright, so that's looking pretty decent. And again, let's go back and kind of tweak all of the lights that we had placed before. And kind of just see what we can do to kind of make these bloom a little bit more. Maybe go back to the render settings, play with some bloom. So again, bloom is taking the bright spots of the scene and really amplifying it a little bit. Again, giving us that very nice, hazy, and atmospheric look that we're looking for. So now I'm feeling the sun is a little too bright, so let's just turn that down a tad. And then now let's go back to the volume cube and go back to the material. And now let's just see what we can do. Play with this a little bit. Give it a little bit of contrast. And there you go, that's feeling pretty good to me. Okay, so we have all of our lights set up and we have our volume fog in the scene giving us this nice atmospheric look. So let's go back ahead and unhide the clouds that we previously had originally. And there you go, and now you can see how the volume of the clouds is affected by the lighting and by the fog, and it's quite a nice effect that we have here. And now that we have the clouds back on, let's go back ahead and do a little bit more iteration on our settings that we had done before. So let's just take a look at our volume cube again, and let's see what kind of tweaking that we can do. Kind of want to give it a little bit more of a blue tint. So we're going to add it back. We're going to tweak the color a little bit to give it a little bit more of a saturation. Let's also add a little bit more density to it. Something like that. Let's see what we can do with the sun a little bit. A little too blown out. I think we'll just leave the sun the way it is. Yeah, there you go. You know, at this point, I think it's a pretty good base. I would say that the lighting here is about 80 to 90% done. What we're going to do now is we're going to export this out as an image, and we're going to bring it into Photoshop to finish it off. And I just wanted to mention that since this is a lighting tutorial, for the sake of brevity, I didn't go over the way I had created these clouds through the meta balls, but that can be something of a future tutorial video that I can definitely show you later. But yeah, let's take this image now into Photoshop and see what we can do to punch it up a notch. So the way that we want to export this image out properly to Photoshop would be to go first into this output tab here. And then 1920 by 1080 is a good size for me. And then I typically export it out to around 200% of the resolution. So when I bring it into Photoshop, it's double the size, because that's always a good practice to export an image out at high resolution, and then later on you can trim it down and decrease the resolution back to its original size if you want to. And then I use the PNG format, and then once you have all of these settings set up here, you just go to the render tab and then render image. I'm not gonna go ahead and do this because it's gonna take a bit of time, so we're just gonna jump right into Photoshop. So now that we have our base render in Photoshop, we're just gonna be adding the finishing touches to it. So first thing I want to do is add a new layer, and then we're gonna make this layer into a color dodge layer here. And essentially what I'm going to be doing here is just accentuating and punching up the lighting that we had placed in Blender, and just really trying to achieve things that we were not really able to achieve in 3D. And again, since this was intended to be a flat image to begin with, a concept art piece, and not a 3D scene that you can rotate in and fly your camera around, this is a completely fine workflow, because at the end of the day, the whole 3D aspect of things was to really just set up a render that we can take into Photoshop anyway. And again, since this is a lighting tutorial, there's a lot of steps that I'm skipping here in terms of digital painting and painting over the panels of the ships that we're missing here. But for the sake of brevity, I don't want to go over that, since I want this to be more focused on lighting, but we can definitely go over some future tutorials. So again, now that we have our color dodge layer, we're just going to take our paintbrush here, and we're going to take a basic soft brush. And again, the soft brush is, any one of these really with the soft edges should do. And then I'm just going to I'm going to color pick this color here and just select a brighter value of that hue. And if you remember earlier in the video, I mentioned that I wanted this top left corner to really be sort of the brightest part of the scene, kind of where the sun and or the directional light is coming from. Now I want to just really punch that up and really make that part of the scene bright. Something like that. Really give it a sense of where the lighting is coming from. Now I want to do the same thing. I'm going to add another layer here, and the same thing with color dodge. And I'm going to be accentuating this point light that we have here at the front. So again, I'm going to be color picking the color of that point light that we had added in Blender. And let's just add a little bit more color to that. And another color dodge layer. Now we're just going to paint that in to just give it a little bit more of that atmospheric look. Let's add that to the other ship as well. And as you notice, the tail end here that we added the blue point lights to didn't really do much for us. So we're just going to be adding that in Photoshop. Again, color dodge. Now let's just select that intended blue that we had wanted. And let's just add that to the tail end there. Give that nice contrast from the orange lighting. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to even add some rim lights. Got some rim effect from the engine here. So what I'm going to do is I just added a circle tool. Then what I'm going to do is go to select, modify, and create a border. And let's try 4 pixels. And that should be pretty good. Now I'm going to make another color dodge layer. And then we'll paint this in to give us sort of like an emissive glow. Something like that. To give us a little bit of an engine. Now we're going to take that same layer, going to go to filter, and let's just blur it a little bit. Something like that. Now we're going to take that same layer, we're going to duplicate that layer. And let's suggest that there are 2 of these here. And then we'll erase the parts that shouldn't be there. And then now we'll do the same for that distant ship. Resize it so that it matches the scale of the far ship there. And duplicate that. Something like that. And then last but not least, we're going to be adding another layer. And we're going to make this a multiply layer. And now we're just going to be adding some darker spots to finish it off. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go all the way to the gray here. And let's pick like a mid-level gray. And I'm just going to go to the corners of the scene, and this will kind of act as a vignette and really frame the main parts. Add a little bit of darkness there. Again, add some of that obscurity that we wanted. And there we go. And one final thing actually that I would like to do is add some image adjustments. And let's just try to do a little bit of add a photo filter just to give it a little bit of warmth. Let's go with a warm filter. I feel like without it, it's just turning a little bit too blue. And this warmth really gives it a little bit more of a grounded, more realistic feel. Now let's go add maybe a little bit of a color balance. Play with that a little bit. And these image adjustments, I really like to keep to a minimum, right? Like they should not be super overpowering and really changing the image that much, because everything that you do should have been done within the base of the image, and the color filters and all the other image adjustments should be more of a little cherry on top more than anything. So that pretty much wraps it up for this lighting tutorial. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you picked up a few things that you can apply to your own projects. If you have any thoughts or questions, please comment down below. And as always, it's super appreciated if you could like and subscribe to this channel. And other than that, I hope you have a wonderful day. Have a wonderful day.